The wind out in Lincoln, Nebraska doesn't just blow in January, it howls like an old neighbor who's lost their way. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one with the floral pattern that my late husband, Arthur, always said looked like a garden in a snowstorm. Outside, the drifts were piling up against the porch, burying the bottom step of the veranda, but inside, the house smelled like the pot roast my daughter Sarah was searing in the kitchen. It's a scent that defines my winters: onions, rosemary, and slow-cooked beef, a heavy, savory blanket that tries its best to keep the cold at bay. Sarah had moved back in with me last fall. She told the rest of the family it was to help me keep up with the rising property taxes and the relentless shoveling, but I knew the truth. She wanted to make sure I didn't trip over my own shadow. At 80, you become a project to your children. They look at you and see a fragile vase that might crack if the wind changes direction. But I still feel like the woman who ran the local bakery for 30 years, the one who could knead 40 loaves of sourdough before the sun even hit the silos. "Mom, did you take your heart meds?" Sarah called out over the sizzle of the pan. "I'm 80, Sarah, not 87, I joked, though I knew exactly which little orange pill was sitting on the counter, forgotten next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. My grandson, Leo, was sprawled on the rug in the living room, his face illuminated by the blue glare of his Nintendo. He's 12, that age where he's mostly limbs and silence, but he still likes to be in the same room as me. It's a quiet American Tuesday, the kind where the most exciting thing is deciding whether to have peach cobbler or apple pie for dessert. We are a normal family, or so I thought. But as the sun dipped below the frozen horizon, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the snow, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Sarah wasn't humming her usual 80s pop tunes. She was pacing. She's usually the rock of this family, the one who organizes the 4th of July cookouts and never forgets a single birthday. But tonight, she wouldn't look me in the eye. Her movements were jerky, and she kept glancing at the clock on the mantel as if it were a ticking bomb. "Mom, I think it's time you headed up," she said, her voice unusually tight. "The storm is getting worse. The news says we might lose power, and I don't want you wandering down the stairs for tea in the dark. Better to be tucked in early." I laughed it off at first. "It's only 8 o'clock, Sarah. I'm right in the middle of Jeopardy." "Please, Mom, just go up," she insisted. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, not just worry, but a desperate kind of urgency. I obliged, mostly to keep the peace. I climbed the stairs, my knees popping with every step like dry kindling. I tucked myself into bed, listening to the radiator clanking, a familiar, comforting rhythm that usually lulls me to sleep. I watched the frost patterns grow on the window pane, crystalline ferns reaching for the center of the glass. I was nearly drifting off when I heard it, a sharp, metallic click. I sat up, my heart doing a nervous little jig in my chest. I walked to the door and turned the brass knob. It didn't budge. I turned it harder, rattling the frame. Locked. From the outside. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the empty room. "The door is stuck, honey. I think the house is settling again." Silence followed, heavy and cold. Then I heard the distinct heavy jingle of my own keychain, the one with the brass fob from the 1984 World S Fair, being pulled from the hallway side of the lock. "I'm sorry, Mom," Sarah whispered through the wood. I could hear her leaning against the door. Her voice was cracking. "It's for your own good. I just can't let you see what's happening. Not tonight. Just stay there until morning. Please, just trust me." I stood there in the dark, my hand still on the cold knob. I felt a surge of indignation, then fear. What could be so terrible that she had to imprison her own mother? My mind raced through the possibilities. Was she selling the house? Was there someone downstairs she didn't want me to meet? I thought of Leo. Was he safe? I sat on the edge of my bed, the silence of the snowy night feeling heavier than the drifts outside. I looked at the old rotary phone on my nightstand, the one I kept for emergencies because I never quite mastered the smartphone Sarah bought me. I picked it up, expecting the comforting hum of a dial tone. Nothing. The line had been cut or unplugged. Just as the first tendrils of true panic began to take hold, I heard a low, rhythmic thumping coming from the direction of the garage, which sits directly beneath the guest wing. It wasn't the sound of the wind or the house settling. It was rhythmic, mechanical, a thud, a hiss, and a scrape. I'm a Nebraska woman. I wasn't about to sit in a locked room while something strange happened under my roof. I remembered that the closet in my bedroom shared a wall with the old servant's staircase, a narrow, steep passage we'd boarded up years ago during the remodel. I moved the heavy cedar chest I kept my quilts in, my muscles aching with the effort. Behind it was the small access panel for the plumbing. I squeezed through, my nightgown catching on a stray nail. The air in the crawlspace was freezing and smelled of old dust and insulation. I moved quietly, guided by the dim light of a flashlight I kept in my robe pocket. I reached the landing above the garage and peered through a gap in the floorboards where the heat vent had been removed. Down below, the garage was flooded with bright industrial work lights. Sarah was there, but she wasn't alone. My son-in-law, Mark, who was supposed to be on a business trip in Omaha, was standing by the workbench. And there was a third person, a tall man in a dark overcoat I didn't recognize. In the center of the garage sat Arthur's old 1965 Mustang. He'd spent 20 years trying to restore that car, but he'd passed away before he could ever get the engine to turn over. Sarah and Mark were frantically stripping the interior panels out of the car. They weren't restoring it, they were dismantling it. "Is it here?" Sarah hissed, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. "The map said the floorboards," Mark replied, his hands covered in grease. "If your father really did hide it, it has to be in the frame. He wouldn't have kept it from me if it wasn't dangerous," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "But we have no choice. The debt isn't going away, Mark. If we don't find what he left, we lose the house. We lose everything." I watched, breathless, as Mark pried up a false metal plate beneath the driver's seat. He reached in and pulled out a heavy, rusted metal box. My breath hitched. I remembered that box. Arthur used to tell me it contained the secrets of the soil, a joke I never understood. I always thought it was just old seeds or land deeds. The stranger in the overcoat stepped forward. "Open it," he commanded. Mark used a crowbar to snap the lock. As the lid creaked open, I expected to see gold coins or stacks of cash. Instead, the man reached in and pulled out a stack of old, yellowed envelopes tied with twine and a small, leather-bound ledger. The man flipped through the ledger, his eyes widening. "Do you have any idea what this is?" he asked. "Just tell us if it's enough to clear the books," Sarah said. "This isn't money," the man whispered. "This is a record of every illegal land grab and chemical spill the railroad covered up in this county for 50 years. Your father wasn't just a mechanic, Sarah. He was a whistleblower who got scared." My heart hammered. Arthur, a whistleblower? He was the man who forgot his keys every day and cried at dog commercials. Suddenly, the stranger looked up, his eyes locking onto the vent where I was hiding. "We aren't alone," he said coldly. Downstairs, the heavy garage door began to creak open, letting in a swirl of snow and the blinding red and blue lights of a police cruiser. But they weren't the local Lincoln police. The markings on the car were different, something I didn't recognize. Sarah screamed as the stranger grabbed the box and bolted toward the back exit. Mark tried to stop him, but the man shoved him aside with a strength that didn't seem human. I scrambled back through the crawl space, my mind spinning. I had to get to Leo. I had to get out of the room. I reached my bedroom door and beat on it. "Sarah, let me out. The police are here." But the voices downstairs weren't calling for an arrest. I heard a deep, booming voice over a megaphone. "Sarah Miller, return the documents immediately. You are in possession of state property." The police weren't there to help. I looked back at the window. The snow was a whiteout now, but I saw a figure standing in the garden, looking up at my room. It wasn't the stranger, and it wasn't the police. It was a man wearing the same hunting jacket Arthur had been buried in. He raised a hand, pointing not at me but at the floorboards beneath my bed. The room went pitch black as the power finally cut out. In the freezing dark, I felt a hand reach out from under my bed and grab my ankle. "Grandma," Leo's voice whispered from the floor, sounding terrified. "Don't make a sound. They aren't looking for the box anymore. They're looking for you." I realized then that the secrets of the soil weren't in the garage at all. Arthur hadn't hidden the truth in a car. He had hidden it in the one place no one would ever think to look, inside the very walls of the room I had slept in for 40 years. And Sarah didn't lock me in to keep me safe. She locked me in because she thought I was the key to opening the final vault. I heard footsteps pounding up the stairs, heavy, rhythmic, and closing in. The lock on my door groaned as someone began to kick it in. "Leo," I whispered, reaching down to grab his cold hand. "Do you still have that pocket knife I gave you for Christmas?" "Yes," he breathed. "Good, because we aren't going out the door." I looked at the floral wallpaper, specifically at the one rosebud that had always looked slightly crooked. I pressed it, and for the first time in my life, The wall behind my bed began to slide open, revealing a darkness much deeper than the night outside. I don't know where that tunnel leads, or why my husband built a fortress inside our home. I don't know if my daughter is a victim or a villain in this story. But as the bedroom door finally burst open, I pulled Leo into the dark and closed the wall behind us. The last thing I heard before the silence took over was the sound of my daughter's voice, crying out my name, not in grief, but in a warning I couldn't yet understand. The tunnel didn't lead to a cellar, but to a fallout shelter Arthur had built during the height of the Cold War. In the flickering glow of Leo's phone, I saw shelves of canned goods, a ham radio, and a second safe bolted to the floor. I didn't need a key. I used the date of our wedding anniversary, 6/1/14, and the heavy door swung open. Inside weren't just more papers, but a series of audio tapes and a thick envelope addressed to me. "Grandma, look!" Leo pointed to a monitor flickering to life on the desk, powered by an old backup generator. On the screen, a video played. It was Arthur, looking decades younger, sitting in this very room. "If you're seeing this, Martha," he said, his voice steady, "then the Miller secret has finally caught up to us. Sarah thinks she's saving the family, but she doesn't know she's working for the very people who took me out of the picture." The heavy thudding above us stopped. The house went deathly quiet. Then, a soft, familiar knock came from the inside of the shelter's emergency hatch. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was sobbing. "Please open up. I didn't have a choice. They have Leo's father." I looked at the screen, then at the hatch. My husband's warning was clear: trust no one. As the handle began to turn, I realized the real story was only just beginning.